Hello, my name is Terry and today we are going to discuss a threshold concept of writing studies. What is a threshold concept? Linda Adler-Kastner and Elizabeth Wardle put together a book called Naming What We Know. In the preface of the book, Ray Land explains that threshold concepts represent conceptual and ontological shifts that individuals acquire to become more effective and capable writers. The overriding idea is that once these competencies are learned, they will last a lifetime and can be applied to the things one does, including writing. These concepts are essential for continued learning, and not only in a particular area of study or discipline, but also within a community or practice. They are what we know, and they are discursive in nature. They are situated around, within, and beside a boundary or a threshold, hence the term threshold concept. These concepts are liminal because they relate to a transitional or initial stage of a process, in this case, the writing process. Threshold concepts can facilitate one's learning and one's development. So it is important to understand these threshold concepts and how familiarity with these will facilitate a smoother transition when incorporating these ideas into the learning and composition processes. Phew, now that the definition stage is covered, let's get on to the concepts. In the book, 37 threshold concepts are identified, which are grouped into 5 meta-concept categories. Relating to the book's title, these 37 concepts are what we know, or rather what we should understand that we should know. The 4th meta-concept is identified as all writers have more to learn. In the book, 6 people contribute their input as it relates to this idea, and each offers their perspective on the subject. Colin Brooke, who is an associate professor of rhetoric and writing at Syracuse University in upstate New York, and Allison Carr, who is an assistant professor of rhetoric at Coe College in Iowa, wrote a selection entitled Failure Can Be an Important Part of Writing Development. Looking at the concept, at first we may say, what, failure is helpful? But now think back to riding a bicycle for the first time. I'm not sure any of us learned how to balance that bike on the first try. Many of us have scars to prove it. I do, a big one on my left knee, but failure can ultimately lead to success. Now this is where I pick things up and explain this concept in hands-on practical terms. As a composition educator for over 15 years, I want to provide students and support and enthuse my students. Most will enter the classroom saying things like, I'm not good at writing, and I soon find out, unfortunately, this is often an accurate statement. But I want to encourage them to keep trying regardless of where they are starting out. As Brick and Carr suggest, only giving praise may not be the only way to approach this goal. Believe it or not, students actually welcome constructive criticism. I've heard things time and time again, like, my high school teachers never told me exactly what was wrong with my writing. I wish my teachers had been so specific about my errors. Most recently, a student wrote to me saying, your grading on drafts is brutal, but I am glad that you are so picky and point out every mistake that I make. I thanked him for his honesty and feedback and told him that he should place a comma before but because he was joining in 2 independent clauses without a conjunction. Conscientious students who desire to develop as writers want the feedback so that they can gain the competencies that they are promised in the syllabus. Oh, let's be honest here, most do not actually read the syllabus, so that they can realize what they need to know to get the good grades and what caused their failed attempts at writing so that they can advance toward their goals. Brooke and Carr remind readers that successful writers usually do not have great drafts to start out. They also share that it may seem counterintuitive to teach writing with some focus on failure, but their point seems spot on. This paper is a draft of a paper written by one of my students this semester, and he failed with a score of 9 out of 25. This is the second draft of the paper after I made comments on it and returned it to him to edit, and he earned an A. Now let me be clear that I do not desecrate papers without warning. In fact, on the first day of class, I tell my students that it is not unusual for a student to receive a failing grade on a few drafts at the beginning of a semester. But if they keep trying to perfect their writing, they can end with success. Those who stay positive and have the desire to learn usually bomb the first 2 or 3 paper drafts, and then by the end of the semester, their essays have evolved tremendously and are something for which they can be proud. Edward Berger, who is a professor of mathematics, substantiates this idea by suggesting that educators build a quality of failure into their courses. What makes this such a practical threshold concept is the fact that the concept applies not only to writing studies, but any discipline. Berger is quoted as saying that every idea from every discipline is a human idea that comes from a natural, thoughtful, and ideally unending journey in which thinkers deeply understand the current state of knowledge, take a tiny step in a new direction, almost immediately hit a dead end, learn from the mishap, and through iteration inevitably move forward. Brooke and Carr also explain the tension inherent within this concept. They remind us that in writing classes, assessments are usually based on finished products. We go back to the idea of product versus process here. If instructors do not explain that writing is a learning process, then students often resist the process for fear of receiving a low score. If they are not made aware that a low draft score is not as important as improvement, then the threshold concept falls short. In the end, the important thing to understand and promote involving this threshold concept is, as Brooke and Carr say, failure is an opportunity for growth. They remind us of Thomas Edison's 10,000 ways that will not work before one finds one that does. They explain that embracing failure in the writing classroom makes failure a positive learning experience. And we should not forget that this is a valuable transferable skill to possess because this concept is not limited to the composition classroom. This concept is what determines success and failure in the real world. We can make mistakes, but can still be successful by practicing, learning, and growing because we acknowledge these failures. Kathleen Blake Yancey, who was a professor of English and research professor at Florida State University, points out that when writers practice writing with the understanding that not everything is great from the beginning, then we can learn how to revise and perfect our writing. And Doug Downs, who is an associate professor of writing and director of composition in the Department of English at Montana State University, seconds this idea, saying that the best writing comes from a number of versions. For this threshold concept to take hold, perhaps the most important thing to remember is that educators must emphasize the notion that pointing out errors is not a punishment, but it can be a reward because the writer has more input and guidance regarding improvement in their writing. These students are thus not inhibited by extensive and oftentimes bad feedback, but rather emboldened by giving them the tools and practice to improve, which will result if the students understand that the teacher is not saying that their writing has no value, but instead that it has potential with more attention and perseverance to overcome defeat. Failure can lead to success, and composition instructors can encourage this to happen.